for my voice, but I have never seen anything like it.
You believe in miracles? Yes! Unbelievable.
Welcome back. It took Alexander Haynes telling me, hey, man, I want to get on the podcast. I want to get going, for me to open back up the Adobe Audition to record a podcast with our boy Alexander Haynes. A lot of stuff has happened since the last time we talked. I have a lot of podcasts coming down the pipeline for you, hopefully. So, without further ado, here's Alexander. All right, on the phone line right now, after a little bit of a hiatus, we took a week off. We have Alexander Haynes coming to us, talking to us a little bit about the coronavirus. Alexander, last week I was moving a guy out of Arkansas. Let me tell you, it's already a better day talking to you. How you been doing, man?
I'm tired. That's all I'm going to say.
Oh,
it's tiring.
So
I'm doing good, though. I'm doing good.
That's good. Let's start off now. The coronavirus has now over 1 million recoveries reported worldwide, Alexander. And, you know, we always try to come up with something good to start the podcast because it always seems to devolve or go into a hole where we've had a couple of bad things, bad stats in a row. So we're starting off with a good one today. Over 1 million recoveries. That has to make you feel good, right?
It does, because that's 1 million recoveries out of 3.25 million cases that we know of. Now, we do know that the overall cases are going to be higher in some places because of under-testing, but also to include more positive into that is also because there are some cases that the symptoms are so slight that people are barely symptomatic or pre-symptomatic or really never devolve into anything worse than a cold. So we do know that cases are going to be a little bit higher, but that also means that the recovery rate is also going to be a little bit higher. So it's very, very encouraging to see that 1 million mark, and I can't wait for that to hit another million, so which will hopefully be coming. Recovery does take time for some people, so don't expect it to continually rise very suddenly, but it will continue to rise, and there is... Maybe you won't think this by the end of the podcast, but there is hope. I do want to start with that there is hope out there, that this is not the end-all, be-all. There's more than just COVID in our future.
Which is good, because right about now, a lot of people have started to say, and we've talked about this for the last couple weeks now, Americans get itchy quick. It is a knit sweater that they start picking at very early into the Christmas dinner. People are already wanting to be on the streets, Alexander. You and I both agree that that's not a great idea. But for the listener at home who might be thinking to themselves, well, Americans have to do what Americans do, guys. They need to go out there and they need to be Americans. What do you have to say to them?
Yeah, so I get that we all want to be out there. Trust me, I've been in my house for 8, almost 9 weeks now. And it has been driving me crazy. I miss the outside world, and I know what we're all going through. But it is very, very important that we see this thing through the end and that we start to implement and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this extensively, what we can do in the future, some ideas that have been tossed around for a better approach or a more economically friendly approach to quarantine, to social distancing, into some of those concepts. But yeah, right now is not the time to relax social distancing or to relax quarantine measures. What we're going to have to do is we're going to have to figure out a solution on, and I know that a lot of the different states have developed these pacts that they're going to work together to relieve the social distancing measures as they see fit. I know in Washington State, we are scheduled to relieve measures on May 4th. I'm hearing that will probably be extended, but by extending, it's going to be for the general population. Construction sites are going to start to open back up soon. We know that some more essential businesses, the definition of essential businesses is going to be expanded in the coming week as Washington State is doing comparatively to the rest of the country well. By contrast, California has continued to see people in large mass hit the beaches, hit the parks. And that's one thing. Washington State, it's cold and rainy here. It's been cold and rainy for 2 weeks now, but we have had some nice weather. Granted, we closed almost all state parks because a lot of people do like to go out in the cold and the rain into the mountains. All those have been closed. California did not close the beaches, and they only closed this week. And that is something that is a danger, is that this is not a vacation. I've seen multiple people treat it like a vacation. This is not a vacation. This is a time for you as an individual, rest, relax. This is stressful, but also I would encourage you to maybe consider thinking, okay, how can I react to this health-wise? How can I react to this economically? What can I invent or what can I create to help drive a solution for, well, maybe the coronavirus, if that's your expertise, but also how can I help drive economic solutions? How can I transition my business, my work? And so it's not a time to be vacationing or to think that this is all an extended vacation, because it's not. Unfortunately, a lot of people are dying and a lot of people are getting sick, and we're going to see some extended circumstances and some extended symptoms that do relate to COVID-19.
Well, the people in Michigan aren't taking a vacation, Alexander, or I should say they're taking a vacation from sanity. They have decided to argue against the stay-at-home orders, and they went to the state capitol today. How much do you know about this and the ongoing story going around Michigan right now?
So I'm tangentially familiar with this. I haven't spent too much time reading it, but I think I can speak to what is happening there. And I'll give an example. In Washington State, there was a gun rally was that in January now, I believe, that I went to cover as a reporter. And it was very different. And to have a bunch of people with AR-15s that I don't know if they were loaded, I'm assuming they were, and military, what I refer to as military cosplay, standing outside the congressional chamber doors in the state capitol, yelling and screaming that they should be barging in right there to take control of the Congress or the state House of Representatives. It was a very disconcerting event, and that's actually a little bit what happened today. Nobody got shot, fortunately, but there was people with AR-15s that entered the congressional or the House of Representative chambers, and they had loaded AR-15s, and they protested, and it is not a sign of a healthy democracy. That is not something that you do when you are sane, when you can voice I'm all for voicing your opinion. There are ways to voice it safely in the middle of a pandemic, I believe. We're in an interconnected age online. You can voice it online and have discussions online. So I really don't think we should be gathering in large protest groups. Unfortunately, the Minnesota leader of the Open Movement, the lady who took that up as the leader in Minnesota, she tested positive for COVID-19. And so I wouldn't be surprised if that happens in some other states. And so what's happening in Michigan, though, more specifically, because of the militarism of these sects, it is very, very disconcerting that they have taken it upon themselves to kind of be this... it's very disconcerting the way that they are choosing to represent their voice. And I do not see this ending well in Michigan.
No, I don't see it ending well anywhere, Alexander. The minute that crazy people want to act crazy, you play stupid games, you get stupid prizes. Here's a stupid prize for you, COVID-19. Okay? That's how I'm looking at it now. Now, all right, you talked a little bit about the way that this is going to affect us long term. I want to talk about the President of the United States. I have not seen a lot of evidence to support this. He is the leader of the free world, so I'm going to take it he might have a little bit more information than we do, Alexander. But he says that they have evidence that the coronavirus originated in a Wuhan lab. Now, to preface this, I have seen the BBC report, I've seen Al Jazeera report, CNN, and NBC. Everybody seems to have the same type of information, that this was not a man-made virus. Now, that's what I'm reading. Where are you on with all this?
Yeah, so I saw that Trump made this statement today, and I don't believe him. I believe that this is purely propaganda, and I can talk through it. I know last time I was on, we talked a little bit about why it's unlikely this originated from a lab in Wuhan. And there's two different theories with that. And so when President Trump gets up there and says it originated from a lab in Wuhan, there are two ways that people can take that. And I'm afraid of what way certain people are going to take that. So the first way is that it's going to be that the virus originated as in it was made in a lab in Wuhan. And that's not the case. And the easiest way to share that why that is not the case is because it has a different binding mechanism that is not seen in the wild, in nature, a lot. And it is not something that is seen in labs at all. So if you make a virus, you're going to select a binding mechanism for it that is widely available. You'll not take the time to research and develop a binding mechanism that is not widely available in a lab. And I hope that makes sense, but that is the easiest way to share that this was not made. The other way to share that it was not made is why would China make this and then release it upon their population and put their own economy and their own people at risk? I get it that the People's Republic of China and the CCP is an authoritarian government, but they are not a government right now that is going to release a virus upon their population, especially one that is this contagious. Now, the other way that this can be taken is that the concept is that the virus was released from a Wuhan lab, that it is because it was due to weak security, which there was reportedly weak security at one of the labs in Wuhan. And that somebody was being negligent with the way that they studied coronaviruses in bats. And there's two reasons that this is highly unlikely. And I want to rule it out, but there is a possibility this happened, but it is so minuscule, I think it's safe to rule out. The first one is that the lab that there were security issues with was not even studying bat coronaviruses. So it was that was another lab, and it was unconnected to the one that studied bat coronaviruses. The other reason that it is highly unlikely that it jumped from a lab to out into the population is because you cannot just release a coronavirus into the population and then people are infected. The coronavirus is a family of viruses, and COVID-19 is one of them. Only a select few. There's plenty of other coronaviruses that are out there that are in animals. Bats are a host to a plethora of coronaviruses, and they're very scary. And that's one reason that this research in China is so important to the public good, and that it is important to actually do this research on bats is because the coronavirus strain is something that we need to know more about, because it is a virus, simply because we don't know enough about it, and we don't know how to develop a human vaccine for it. We don't know exactly how it jumps from animals to humans. So it's a very important research because, as we've seen with COVID-19, the coronavirus is a potentially very deadly virus. SARS, which is a lot deadlier than COVID-19, was a family of the coronavirus. But to get back on track, there are a lot of different coronaviruses out in the wild. And it cannot just jump from a lab to the wild population because it has to mutate and it has to evolve to the point where it can jump from an animal, such as a bat or a pangolin or any animal that can host it, to a human. It has to mutate and adapt so that it can start to infect humans. And that does not happen with infecting one human. So, in the case that, let's play the hypothetical, that somebody at the lab mishandled the virus and they infected themselves with the coronavirus. They digested it somehow. Because it is the first, and I could misunderstand this, but so somebody out there, because this is very complicated science, and I'm trying to make it as simple as possible. So if somebody is out there wants to correct me, please feel free to correct me. But the virus cannot jump to one human. A coronavirus cannot jump from an animal to a human in one jump, and all of a sudden be this infectious. it has to jump to a human, and it has to mutate in that human, and then spread to another, and it will make another RNA genetic change, and then it will jump to another human. And now the coronavirus does, in COVID-19, does mutate at a very rapid pace because it is an RNA virus. It's simpler than DNA, so it will mutate faster. However, it has to make multiple jumps in humans and multiple jumps from animals before it can become a widely distributed public virus, where it is virulent enough to infect multiple people. So the likely condition is that it did originate somewhere in China, most likely in Wuhan, Hubei province. But it could have originated either in Guangdong or another region, and it most likely started spreading in November, maybe even October, but most likely November. And from there, it made multiple jumps. It mutated to this perfect point where it is virulent enough to stay stable in this strain. And it is still making genetic changes, but it is not changed enough to make a new strain yet. There's an excellent New York Times article that explains the science behind that. So I'll link that tonight on Twitter so people can find that easily. The point is that to get back on track, is that it likely did not develop from a Wuhan lab, and you would have to do extensive tracing to prove that. You'd have to do extensive research to prove that, and it'd be probably something that it is not something that you fly a spy plane over and say, "Oh my gosh, Cuba has a nuclear facility," like we did with the Cuban Missile Crisis. It takes a very long time to confirm where a virus came from, and because of the secrecy that China has and the way that they have manipulated this, and I'm not trying to get China off and the CCP off of the way that they did cover this up and hurt their own citizens, but it is not. They did not release this from a lab, and it likely did not release from a lab in Wuhan.
So
I hope I explained that well enough. Sorry that was so long.
I think you did a good enough job. So we were talking a little bit about what we can do to kind of spread out, because California just now closed their beaches. On the other coast, Florida is opening their beaches. I just want sports back, Alexander. I'm going to be completely honest with you. I don't care if movies go direct to demand. I don't care if fans don't get to be in the stadiums. I just want sports. And I am starting to think more and more that we're not going to get that anytime soon. Would I be wrong?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know. Now, if you do really want sports, you can get up really early in the morning. And Taiwan is playing baseball now with no fans, but Taiwan is playing baseball, and it's baseball after all. And it's pretty good baseball too. Now, sports such as the MLB, the NBA, I'm doubting that the NFL season is gonna even be going to be something that is playable. And one of the reasons for that is the way that the model is going is that the curve is not going to go down in the United States because we have such inconsistency across the United States. What is the condition that is playing out now is a very, very long plateau. So cases have plateaued to about 30,000 new cases a day. And it's been stagnant, and it shows the signs are that it's going to stagnate for a while at 30,000 new cases a day due to the inconsistency across the United States. As far as, and to address sports specifically, I'm not sure how they're going to be able to do it safely. And the chief reason behind this is because it is such a contagious virus. If one person gets it, and is specifically with baseball, because you play in 14 days, which is the maximum time for you to start to develop symptoms. You will see that you play an average series is 3 games, so that is quick math. That's almost 5 teams that you'll play in that time, and some series are 2 games. So we'll just say you play 5 teams. That is potentially 5 other teams around the league that are infected at that time, or that get somebody infected. Because if the player infected is hanging around third base, they get the third base coach infected, they get the third baseman infected. He goes back to his dugout, starts to spread it to the team the next day, because the incubation period is about 12 hours to 1 day minimum to become symptomatic, so that you can spread it. And it is most contagious during the pre-symptomatic phase, which is very discouraging. And then that team goes on to play 4 different teams. So all of a sudden you have, in a 14-day time span, all of a sudden you go from 0 teams infected to 11 teams, 11 teams in the MLB have cases. Season's over. I don't think we're getting baseball back. In NBA, because it is a series now we could go directly to the playoffs, and there's a little bit of difference there, where you can control it more because you're playing one team for a short time. You kind of get a break. But I really... just because of the scenario I laid out, I believe it is too risky right now to return to sports and to return to potentially infecting family members back at home, to infecting staff at baseball parks. Because you got to remember, even if there are no fans, there is going to have to be limited staff at baseball parks who clean, who help to open the park, security, because there are crazy people out in the world. I miss sports, and I kind of want to hear your thoughts on this. Have you heard about any of the MLB rumors about how the MLB is going to break up the divisions around the league to handle this?
So for the fans who don't know, we've talked about this a little bit before, about the Cactus League versus the Grapefruit League. So it's essentially the teams that are in that area of the country are going to probably play each other versus the teams in the other area. And it was kind of set up where they kind of set a East Central West type of division, where teams on the West Coast were only going to play teams in the West Coast, teams in the Central were only going to play teams in the Central, to kind of keep it isolated. But the problem is kind of like what you mentioned, that if a team flies into St. Louis and then flies out to Cincinnati and then plays a doubleheader in Chicago, well, that's 3 of the 15 major metropolitan cities that could potentially have this, outbreak of the disease, especially when you consider the Yankees and the Mets and the Philadelphia Phillies and the Pirates. It's just, there's too much. There's too many teams already, and there's too much of a chance for somebody to get injured, to get sick. Basketball right now, I think, has it the worst, because baseball didn't even get a season, so you're not missing anything, right? Like when the 94 season got cut because of the strike, people are so up in arms about that because the season got stopped in the middle of the season. You didn't get a title team. You missed out on all the second half storylines. Football doesn't get a season. That sucks. You'd like to see Patrick Mahomes. You'd like to see Lamar Jackson on the field. Baseball, again, doesn't get a season. But basketball needs to crown a champion, because you can't go 90% of the season, 85% of the season, and then not have a champion. So they are the team, or they're the league, I think, that's trying to figure this out the most. And they've said that they might play games in Las Vegas and Orlando, and just have an isolated city and rope everything off, and nobody gets in, nobody gets out, that type of deal. But again, I say, unless we get a vaccine, which is what I was going to ask you about, is there any news about a vaccine? I haven't seen or heard anything. It's still 12 to 18 months out, it feels like.
This is going to be the worst news of the podcast.
Well, at least we got it 24 minutes in. All right, hit us with it.
Okay. So there's been more writing about a coronavirus vaccine recently that I've been reading on, and a lot of this has come out of Australia, but it's just kind of a more universal explainers about why a vaccine is so hard to develop. And a vaccine is hard to develop anyways, but a coronavirus vaccine is, unfortunately, we've said 12 to 18 months because we have 70 labs around the world, and historic, a lot of rope being cut to push a vaccine, and there are multiple ways that they're looking at it. I'm not going to get into the science behind the ways because I don't fully understand it myself, but there are multiple different types of vaccines that they're looking at for how you can inoculate somebody. The problem is that there is no coronavirus vaccine for humans in existence. There are very few in existence for animals. You cannot, and this has been a problem for years. This has been something that, remember, SARS was a problem in 2003, and well, because it was a shortened epidemic, mostly in China, Hong Kong, and a few other countries, it was never a pandemic, and fortunately, it would have been very bad as a pandemic. And because of that, research on it did slow down, but they still have not developed a vaccine, and it's been 18 years. Now, there are historic efforts to do this, and it is still likely that there could be a vaccine in 12 to 18 months. However, it's going to be something that will revolutionize the way that we develop vaccines and the way that we look at public health. That's how monumental this is going to be. Coronavirus is a very, very difficult virus to make a vaccine for. And the chief reason for that is because the coronavirus, unlike other strains of viruses, and I won't explain why it does this, but there's plenty of literature on it, why this response I'm going to explain now does happen to coronaviruses, is that if you inoculate somebody with a coronavirus vaccine, what they have found is that there is a potential in the vaccines that they've tried so far, there's a potential for a autoimmune disorder to develop, where it suddenly kicks into the autoimmune system, kicks into high gear, and starts to fight back against the person. I forget the specific name for this condition, but basically it helps the vaccine, helps the coronavirus to accelerate when a person does catch it. Instead of holding the T memory cells to fight off the coronavirus, it just helps them repopulate more. So you have to develop it at a it is something that is very precarious to develop for, and is something that you cannot take lightly. And that is why the risk is so high that you have to make sure that this condition does not develop. Now, the good news for that, that's bad news. And it does mean that a 12 to 18 month timeline, that may just be too short. We may be looking at 2 to 5 years, maybe. And this could get very, very dark and very, very gloomy. And that's why I think the government should start looking at how to eradicate this and how to deal with centralized quarantine more. And there's a great explainer article that I linked later this week. I'll attach it to the podcast thread later tonight as well, that explains how governments can take a look at centralized quarantine to help fight this and to help eradicate this, such as countries like Vietnam has had 0 deaths, and they're right by China. Myanmar is very, very, they're in a good condition, even though they're a very poor country and they're right next to China. Hong Kong has had 0 new cases for 6 days now. South Korea has this was the first day today that they had no new cases. Taiwan has had no new cases for 18 days. So there are success stories out there, and governments can eradicate it. It's going to take a lot of work, and the U.S. and the United Kingdom, I believe, has missed that timeline entirely. The United States is very close to missing that timeline. Canada is probably can still try to eradicate it.
Now, when you say eradicate, what do you mean by that? Because I think that there is a misconception. There's a lot of questions around that term, that phrase with eradication. People throw it around a lot. So what can you explain that to us a little bit more?
So eradicate, in the sense that I'm using it, is that in the very, very real sense of the word, is to eradicate it, to remove it from the population, to the point that it is not endemic to the population, that the only cases that you're getting, because you can have a virus that is endemic to the population where it is just something that exists in the population, such as the common cold is endemic, the seasonal flu is endemic, but the coronavirus right now is very close to becoming endemic to certain populations, and to a certain extent it already is. So what I mean by eradicate is to the point that it is when it does pop up, it is controlled by quarantining the people and quarantining populations that do have it, curing them, recovering, making sure that they recover, and then taking additional hygienic precautions so that you do not have community outbreaks, but the only outbreaks, and hopefully we have no imported outbreaks. This is why this has to be a global effort, but to make sure that any cases are going to be outside imported cases.
Now, China has started to open up the restrictions a little bit, and they were about, I think in the beginning they were about a month off of where we were, where they had cases, what would you say, about a month, 2 months ahead of the United States' first case?
Yeah, in China?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they their first case was likely in November.
So, okay, 2 or 3 months.
Yeah,
they're starting,
about 3 months.
They're starting to open up things a little bit more. For a dumb American over here, they're looking at that thinking, okay, well, if China can open up, we only have a couple more weeks. Why is that an incorrect idea?
Shortest way to explain that is because China did mass lockdown and they quarantined everybody. They did a hard lockdown and a centralized quarantine that allowed them to just eradicate it. And parts of that quarantine were very inhumane, as we have seen. However, that does not mean all parts of it were inhumane, that all officials treated it as inhumane. We just saw the worst of it by corrupt officials, but that model can work. Doing quarantining people in sectors that do have it can work to help eradicate it. The United States has not done that. We still have domestic air travel. 30,000 people a day are still getting it. We're plateauing. We're not declining at all. And it's good that we're plateauing, but we need to start to see a decline. And until that happens, we're going to have a very hard time opening up for more than a few weeks at a time and going back into a semi-lockdown. So, yeah.
Now, this coronavirus, it's funny, because I've always said that at the beginning of decades, either 2000, you had Y2K, in 2010, you had a little bit of a revolution from a social standpoint. In 2020, it feels like the coronavirus has hit this country and really shaken everything to the core. One of those being healthcare, and one of those kind of branches off that tree would be healthcare workers. We have seen a overflowing of hospitals, like you warned about months ago, and we've seen more and more nurses and doctors really get pushed to their limits. If you had to hypothesize, if you had to theorize what we were going to see coming out of this, talking about healthcare workers and the way they're treated, what can we expect?
I hope they're treated better, and I hope they get a better system to work with so that they can really care for patients. It's really exposing the insecurity of the United States healthcare system and how much red tape is around it, how much it does not provide for everybody, the loopholes that are in the American healthcare system. Unfortunately, that's what coronavirus has exposed. And I hope coming out of this, there are ways that healthcare workers can really start to provide for everybody and also can get better compensation and better treatment themselves. I think that's going to be important going forward in how we look at providing resources for not only for research, but for healthcare workers to be better protected, to better understand what is going on. Unfortunately, there is a lot of misinformation that I've seen coming from doctors who do have doctorates, who are medical doctors. They just are quack doctors, and that's the thing. So I think going forward, the two things that we're going to have to really take a look at are the protection of, and I shouldn't just say protection, but research around hygiene and research around healthcare. I believe there's going to be a huge revolution in that, probably in the next decade, and probably coming in the next 2 decades once a lot of the children that are born this year and through 2025, once they become college students, because their life is going to be, their parents are going to tell them stories about 2020 and 2021 and the coronavirus. So they're going to want to become epidemiologists and solve these problems. This is going to be, I believe it's going to be the big focus of research, and how do we make healthcare better based off of this pandemic? How do we better provide and care for or prepare for situations like this.
All right, on the show, you know how we like sports so much, Alexander. And with sports comes power rankings. The power rankings of public officials right now through 3 months of the coronavirus. I'm looking at it this way. Andrew Cuomo came in very, very, very low in a lot of people's minds. I think people outside of New York didn't really like him that much. I think people in New York didn't love him. He's coming out of this looking really good. He's run his state pretty well. I think he has done an excellent job in the face of this pandemic, and I'm not a huge fan of his. How do you feel right now putting him at number 1 on our public figure power rankings?
That's I should have prepared for this question because I would have a power ranking of public officials. I'm not sure if he's number one. Because there were some issues that he punted on early, and there have been some issues, and the hard part is that hindsight is 2020, and he responded quickly, but not all of his quick and hasty solutions worked perfectly. So there have been some problems with the New York response. Granted, it's really hard to, hindsight is 2020. He had to make decisions fast because it was the worst hit spot in the world to date. There are a few other spots in Ecuador might be worse. Ecuador is just tragic. And I forget. There's a couple other places that might compete with New York, unfortunately. New York might be one of the worst spots in the world, though.
All right, let me put up another one then. Dr. Fauci, would you say public official, public health official? Would you put him at number 1?
I would put him.
Is he in your top 5?
He's in. Oh yeah, he's definitely in my top 5 for multiple reasons, but also for that face palm he gave at one of the conferences. He has done a very good job considering the situation that he's in, considering the shenanigans that are going on with the White House team and those daily press conferences. He has done a lot, I believe, to try to set the course right. I don't believe he's been perfect either, but nobody has been perfect. I believe he might be number 1 if we're looking at the United States specifically.
All right, if you were going to go worldwide, because I'm just trying to give you some meatballs here. I can't think of anybody internationally who's been knocking out of the park either. Boris Johnson said today that he thought that the UK was on the second half of their peak. He thought the peak had already come and gone. We both agree that is probably not the case. China's officials, that's a joke in itself. The WHO, they have a lot of fumbles as well. I'm thinking Dr. Fauci would be a really good number 1, Alexander.
I would have to put Vietnam and Taiwan. I believe Taiwan. It's between Taiwan and Vietnam, and I wish I had some specific names. Taiwan, though, they handled this very quickly. They did their own research. They did not rely on the World Health Organization. They did follow their advice, but they also did some early research that helped them make the decision to. And at that time, it was a controversial decision because research is always research, and you don't know. That's the problem is we're running with hypothesis and not complete theories here. But Taiwan ran with the hypothesis that they needed to lock down their borders, that they needed to do centralized quarantine, and that they needed to start testing people very early. And Taiwan has not had a case for 18 days, but Vietnam has to have, and I did write an extensive piece on Vietnam, and because they had 0 deaths, because they are a poor country, because they are, I should say, developing country, because they're so close to China, you would have assumed that they would have more cases, but they handled this very well. The people that did get infected, they quarantined the villages, they tested everyone, they isolated everybody for 14 days, they helped people recover, they did not let it get out of control. And had it gotten out of control, the one thing that we know why Vietnamese numbers are accurate are because if it did get out of control, their healthcare system is excruciatingly weak. They do have a developing problem with diabetes, which is one of the worst preconditions for this. So all the factors are there for Vietnam to be very bad, and you can't cover something like this up for very long. You know what? I'll give it to Vietnam as number one.
All right. I want to go to my losers.
Okay.
Because
I do have one other fact to
Okay.
give on Vietnam.
Go.
They may have also hacked China to get information early on. There's a report out there that they hacked China, which I find to be a little bit amusing.
That would be something. That's probably what we're going to talk about next week if we can get more facts to back that. I want to go about my loser because there's only one person who is going to come out of this far and away behind the pack. He's not a world leader. He doesn't run a country. It's Joe Biden. I think Joe Biden is coming out of this looking terrible. This dude he came in as a DNC candidate. We talked about it for weeks. I don't care for the guy one way or the other, but if you're going to be the leader of the free world, we need to see you a little bit more than we've seen him. And I have not seen a ton of Joe Biden.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of there is a little bit of disproportionate coverage on anything related to the coronavirus onto what President Trump has been saying. But yeah, Joe Biden's campaign right now is, I can't remember the last thing that he said publicly. It's been very safe statements. I'm surprised he has not made a vice presidential pick yet. That would have been, and I kind of get why is that you don't want to take the news off of a public health crisis, but also campaign wise, I don't know who his vice president is. I don't know if he knows yet. You would think there should be a decision coming on that, but his relative quietness and lack of making bold statements or doing anything there's a lot of room to be very creative with a political campaign right now, and his side has not done that at all.
If I was a Biden supporter, I'd be very disappointed right now. And I get it. It's very easy to trash on Trump or make fun of Mike Pence for going in the Mayo Clinic without a face mask. All of those things, very easy to put them at the bottom of the power rankings. But Joe Biden, man, how are you not going to have anything to say when the only thing that anybody's talking about right now isn't, public school system, it's not infrastructure, it's healthcare, it's something that your opponents have run on, fixing healthcare. This would be the time to really swing some voters and radio silence.
Yeah, no, that's a very, very good point.
All right, I want to talk a little bit more about the spacing that you were talking about. You mentioned it earlier, how we can all stay a little bit further apart from each other. You want to go on that a little bit more?
Yeah, definitely. Just how we can continue to, maybe that we can start to get some people back to work and start to institute a normalized practice.
Sure.
Okay. So I think that the best way to do this, and I'll link the article that explains this very well, the concept of centralized quarantine. And basically what we can do is start to isolate the people who have it. And because one of the problems in the United States has been, okay, well, you might have this, go home. And that has been because then family members get infected. We know those people don't follow rules, and they are like, oh, I feel fine. I may have it, I may not. I'm going to go out to the grocery store. I'm going to go out and party or do whatever. So there needs to be a centralized quarantine where people are put in hotels, where people are put in government facilities so that they can be treated. And so not only treat it, but so that they can be isolated from everybody else for 14 days. And this will allow people, this is the quickest way to, like we talked about earlier, get it down to a level that is not endemic and that you can start to control isolated outbreaks instead of, this way where the cases are and you can look at in there and you cannot, and you're not scrambling looking at it randomly. Now, the one problem with this is if you miss cases elsewhere. And that is a problem is if you focus so much on this that you miss cases that are outside of the centralized quarantine and you start to ignore people that there might be a cluster over there. So this has to be a very calculated, and you have to be very, very serious about this approach, but it is probably the best approach going forward instead of going for a plateau or going for a going for a lockdown every other few weeks, or even going for herd immunity. Herd immunity is not going to be. It's not reached in a month. You can't do that. It's not reached in 2 months. It's half a year to a year to get to true herd immunity in a country the size of the United States. I don't want to be doing that, and that's not going to get people. Herd immunity is not going to get people back to work.
You were talking. I think we're done with the coronavirus. I think we've really hit as much as we can hit. I want to talk about Michael Flynn, because you had hit me up and you said we want to talk about him and the alleged framing of him. I haven't been keeping up with this story nearly as much as you have. Break it down for us.
All right, yeah. So this came out last night, and what it was released FBI notes from the Michael Flynn investigation that showed that the FBI, there was a statement written in these notes. Do we get him to lie? I forget the exact word, but the approach in the notes was, do we get him to lie? Do we force him to lie? Along those lines. And so the whole premise of this is that Michael Flynn, who is admitted his guilt in court, is not guilty because he was forced into lying. He was forced and he should be exonerated, and he is not a criminal, et cetera, et cetera. The chief problem with this is fairly simple. And I'm not saying that this is all fake, that there's nothing here. There's, to the extent that we can find out what happened, we should, because those notes, that's not a note that an investigator should be making. However, what is the context of the notes? Who was the FBI agent that wrote these notes? Were these notes an order to somebody else, or were these notes just some delinquent FBI agent who wrote them down? Because this could have been notes that another FBI agent wrote, and then he never conducted the interview. This is not proof that he was forced into lying. This is not even proof that he was... this is not the actual interview. There's no evidence so far that he was actually forced into lying in the interview. He admitted his guilt in court. I'm not really sure. This does not equate to the big news that everybody's making it out to be. Yes, those types of notes shouldn't be made, but the timeline of the original investigation still holds up, and this does not equate to legal entrapment.
Is there anything we missed, Alexander?
I don't think so. Just stay safe, everybody. I think... Man, I really want some positive news eventually. Like, I don't know. We need sports back. We really need sports back.
Let me ask you a question, because I'm going to do a podcast about this later this week, about the Jordan documentary, because we're about halfway through now with the docs. This has been really the only sports adjacent thing that we have going on right now. How do you feel about it? Are you in? Are you out? Have you watched any of it?
Unfortunately, I've been too busy to watch it, and I really want to watch. I hope it comes to like Netflix or some streaming service, because I don't. It's something that, I mean, I'm young. I didn't see any Michael Jordan games growing up, and it looks super interesting. But I've just been personally too busy with other projects to be able to watch it.
Well, I got good news for you, Alexander. Netflix spent $20 million or something like that, like $20 million. To help produce this. So they get the rights after it's done on TV. They get the streaming rights to it.
Beautiful. Perfect.
So I'll talk to you in 7 weeks when you see it. All right, Alexander. You know where to find him. ACL Haynes on Twitter. He's also the only guy that we know to tell us how it really is. Alexander, thanks so much for coming on.
Hey, thank you very much.
Thanks for Haynes for jumping on with us. Thank you to the listeners, you guys, for making it worth our while. We do it for you. He always comes with the best stuff, and that's really the reason I said, let me get on the podcast and get stuff going. But I have been slacking. Life has really caught up to me. Last couple weeks of senior year of college, so, we're trying to relax a little bit while also balancing work and school. It has been a tough time. So, you don't tune into the podcast to hear my sob stories, so I'm not going to give them to you. I'll give them to you on another podcast. Later this week, hopefully later this month, we're going to have more stuff. April is coming to a close. You know what they say, April showers bring May flowers and hopefully good podcast episodes. So, from me to you, hopefully you're safe, and we'll talk to you on Monday.